Good morning, everyone. Good morning and a very warm welcome to our 2020 Retail Bulletin HR Summit. It's really lovely and exciting to be able to host this event online this year. And as much as, of course, we'll miss seeing you in person, we hope you'll enjoy the same quality of speakers and content from the comfort of your own homes. My name is Paul Deeprose. I'm the founder of the Career Gym, and I'm your host for today. For the last 9 years, I've been doing this, and every year I've promised myself that I'd never start the event by saying, well, what a year this has been. But I think this year I may have to break that rule. It's been a year that's tested all of us in different ways, hasn't it? And of course, retail and hospitality has been tested to the full. Within that, HR is a function that has had to stand up and been counted. And from conversations I've had, I'm delighted to say that I believe it's really passed that test with flying colours. Through ambiguity, through constant change, I've seen evidence of HR professionals innovating, leading, and adapting to become true role models in these difficult times. And we've got a programme today crammed full of some of those shining lights in our profession and sector. Today, of course, wouldn't be possible without our sponsors. So firstly, thank you to UKG. This is really exciting and hot off the press. As of midnight last night, Kronos, who you may have previously known them as, have rebranded with Ultimate Software to become United Kronos Group, UKG. So we are one of the first events to be sporting their new livery. So that's very exciting. We'd also really like to thank Workday and DWF for their continued support of this event. And we're really looking forward to hearing contributions from all our partners throughout the day. So before I highlight the agenda, there's a couple of housekeeping points I'd like to raise, if I may. Our panelists will be taking questions, and these will most likely be addressed at the end of their sessions. Questions can be posed at any time, though, through the chat function that is on your toolbar. So please type your questions when you have them, addressing them to particular individuals if that's appropriate. We will be recording the whole event today. The recording will be made available to you to view at after the event, and we'll send you the link for that. However, we won't be publishing the Q&A sessions. The reason for that is just we want to protect anyone who wants to ask slightly sensitive questions. And so just to be clear, the full panel sessions will be made public, but the Q&As won't. So please feel free to ask anything that you feel appropriate, as it won't go into the public domain. And finally, if it's not obvious, for the panel discussions, it may be best to set up your Zoom settings into gallery view, but clearly that's a personal preference for yourselves. So the agenda for today. Following the panel I'm about to introduce, at 11:30, we've got the team from DWF talking to us about the legal framework for the current conditions. At 1 o'clock, we've got a panel discussing the importance of well-being and mental health strategies. Following that at 2:30, the panel there is talking through employee engagement in times of crisis. And we finish at 4 o'clock with a discussion on how to prepare your workforce for the future. So a really full and exciting day full of great content and great participants. So to kick us off, I'm delighted to hand over to a good friend of the Retail Bulletin conferences, Mock O'Keefe, who is the founder of the innovation Beehive. He's going to be guiding us through a discussion on HR leadership and the organizational change in times of disruption. So I hope you really enjoy the day, settle back, and Mock, over to you.
Great, thanks very much, Paul. Hello, everyone, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us on this exciting topic that could not be more top of mind at the moment. We have a fantastic panel here to share their thoughts and hear your questions this morning. We're joined by Martin Hickerton, who's the Associate Professor at the University of Lincoln, who's doing a lot of work around change management and how traditional models may not work during the pandemic and how leaders need to think differently. Reick, who's Director of People and Talent for QOOT, a number of different hospitality brands such as the Lebanese Bakery, Lunchroom, Gentlemen Baristas, that I think sounds fantastic, and has an wide HR hospitality experience with brands such as Bills and Leon. Siobhan McHale, who's joining us from Australia in a completely different time zone, thank you so much for that, who is EGM of People, Culture and Change at DuluxGroup Australia, and also a published author of The Insider's Guide to Culture Change. I ordered it on Amazon last night, it'll arrive tomorrow, hopefully won't arrive during this panel discussion. Pirri, who's the Chief People and Culture Officer at Dorchester Collection, sitting in a gorgeous room there for us today. The Dorchester Collection is a number of different luxury hotels, such as the Dorchester, 45 Park Lane, the Plaza Athene, which those of you who are Sex and the City fans will recognize that from the last two episodes there, and the fantastic Beverly Hills Hotel. And as your host today on this panel, I'm Mark O'Keefe, as Paul said. I'm the founder of the Innovation Beehive. Previously, I've been an HR director in a number of retail and hospitality businesses, both in the UK, Europe, USA, and in Australia. And we work with organizations taking our cue from the world of disruption and innovation, looking at leadership, culture, and HR innovation. And I'm also the author of the Innovation Ecosystem and recently published white paper called Leading Through Disruptive Times that all of you will receive after today. So leadership, HR leadership and disruptive times. Well, as Paul said, we are living in massively and constantly changing times. And there's a challenge to us, particularly as the HR and L&D community. How do we lead in the current times? But then also, how do we lead through disruption? How do we lead people through to a better future and keep facing the organization forward? So as leaders, we're having to make decisions with lots of different emerging data sets, often incomplete data sets. We're getting information in real time from the news, from our governments at the same time as our employees. And in the past, ultimately, we as leaders had the answers. At the end of the day, if we'd gone through all the coaching models and we tried to support someone in their performance, we probably knew what to do. Now, we don't have all the answers. So what do we do when nobody really knows what to do? So our role really as HR practitioners is helping our people lead, but also we're human beings. We're going through this as well. It's also about examining and being conscious of our own leadership because we're experiencing it too. And as Paul has said, HR and L&D absolutely has stepped up to the plate. Our time has absolutely arrived. We are at the table, at sometimes on the table, and we've created innovative solutions. We've worked in incredibly agile ways. We've trialed things. We've experimented out in public. We've indexed on comms, and we've all learned about furlough and all those sorts of complex HR operational things. But in our white paper, Leading Through Disruptive Times, we've spoken to a number of leaders who went through the global crash, people who operated successfully during SARS, who are coping with all the disruption of AI and change in their business as a day-to-day, and are now having to cope through COVID-19. And we asked them, what do you do? What practices do you have that will help you and does help you lead through these incredibly disruptive times? And they told us about 5 practices: leading in head, leading in heart, leading in habit, leading in health, and leading in history. So I'll just give a quick overview of those, and then we'll go over to the panel for some discussion. So leading in head, this is kind of, you know, the business stuff. This is about getting your business in line. At the moment, for many of us, it's about constantly working to make sure we have effective operations in the business. Marco, we were talking about that yesterday, making sure the business operations function. Ensuring we don't over-index in crisis management mindset, And also, as we're making decisions with these incomplete data sets, being really transparent about the decision-making process and when we might need to go back and review it. So the first practice, leading in head. The second one, leading in heart, is about keeping people engaged and seeking to understand what's important to them at that particular moment right now, because it will change. You know, we're all going through change curves. We're all experiencing levels of trauma. We all respond to things differently. So as leaders and as HR and L&D functions, trying to take the mood of the organization, but also trying to understand what's happening in our teams and with our people and meeting them where they are right now. And this is about building deep levels of trust, creating that environment of psychological safety, particularly as we're having to experiment and try things out. We might have done a small pilot in the past, but now we're having to go full pelt and experiment things. And people, if they feel psychologically safe, are more happy to put their ideas forward and fail out loud. The third practice that people told us about was leading in health. Now, I know you've got a great session this afternoon on wellness, and wellness really has become front and center in our discussions during this pandemic. And often I think in the past, whilst we may have had a well-being strategy, it kind of potentially sat on the peripheries of the HR strategy. You know, it might be some private healthcare, some discounts to some yoga classes, wherever it was. Now it's absolutely front and center. And actually in our research, 74% of our leaders that we interviewed said they had a personal practice to take care of their well-being every day. Because if you take care of yourself, you can then take care of your people, you can then take care of the business and the customers. But leading in health is also about making sure it's okay not to be okay, for people to feel they're able to talk openly and honestly because you've built those levels of trust. But it also applies to us. We don't do wellness to the organization. It's about really taking care of our own sleep, making sure we are hydrated, doing whatever level of exercise suits us, and keeping an eye on our diet. Remember when we used to fly for business and we were always told, put your own oxygen mask on first? That's a really important part that leaders told us. They had to take care of themselves so they could take care of their people. And then moving on to leading in habit. Well, who amongst us has not had to be agile and adapt quickly? We all had Microsoft Teams before now, but how many of them used, and many of us used it the way we're using it today? And this is about, in your habits, understanding what can you control, what can you influence, and what do you have to let go of? What is not going to serve you and is going to take energy from you? And it's built on that kind of Darwinian concept of the most agile and the most adaptive are the ones who survive. And those leaders who told us that they lead in habit are comfortable with constantly changing their position as new data sets emerge, because they're open and transparent about what they know, about the reasons they're taking these decisions, and when they might need to go back and renew the decision they've made. So it's about being more open and being public in terms of the failures that might come. And that, to me, as an innovation man, is the core of innovation. If one positive thing comes out of COVID-19, it's the fact that we're more open to experimenting in public. And the final piece, I think the most important piece has emerged through COVID, is the practice of leading in history. Thinking about, as a leader, you individually, what sort of impact do you want to have on the world? When you're finished serving the population, the people that you serve, and you have the privilege of serving now, how do you want them to feel? What impact do you want to have left behind? And this is about, for an individual, thinking about your purpose, your values, what's important to you. It's about aligning your people to the purpose of the organization and trying to help them face forward, as opposed to just being in the immediate crisis you're in now. And posting a vision of a post-pandemic world to inspire people whilst dealing with the brutal reality of where we are today. So just some food for thought and some stimulus, and you'll get some more information on that. But those 5 practices: leading in head, leading in heart, leading in habit, leading in health, and leading in history. So having said that, I'm going to ask you, Martin, I'm going to ask you to jump straight in. You know, why is it harder to lead during this disruptive and chaotic time?
Thanks, Mark, and good morning, everybody. We've talked about change for years, haven't we? And it's almost as if we've been playing at change, because this year has blown it all out of the water. It's been tumultuous. There's been an unprecedented use of the word unprecedented, and it has been chaotic. I think there's three reasons, Mark. Firstly, change in chaos is not linear. And I think we think about change in a linear fashion. You think, where am I now? Where am I going? And right now, it's not clear. You can't say that this is going to have a reaction of tomorrow. In scientific terms, it's almost like Newtonian mechanics. This action has this reaction, has gone, and it's more of a quantum theory. Things are bubbling up all over the place. It's very difficult to manage change. Secondly, I think we've always seen changes almost top down, whether you're in HR or in leadership, wherever you are, you've got some measure of control. I'm taking my organization, or I'm supporting my organization from here to here. And actually, with COVID, we've seen that it's come from every which direction, and we've not been in control of those things we thought we were. And finally, I think change at the moment, and particularly change in chaos, it's not easy to analyze what's going on. So you've got these traditional tools of change management, so rating how your organization feels, how do employees engage with you. All those traditional models seem to be under pressure. Even SWOT analysis, you're looking at what is your weakness. Who knows what a strength or weakness might be in 6 months' time? Maybe your best strength is being furloughed and not in work at the moment. So for all of those reasons, in chaotic times, it's just much more difficult to know where you are, where you're going, and therefore managing that change is much more difficult.
And the concept of it being, I love the idea that it's non-linear. It's not just two steps. It is. I've never thought we were talking about quantum physics this early in the morning. But I'm thinking in terms of how do leaders maintain credibility and resilience when they're having to lead people through? Leaders emerge, you turn around and people are following you. But actually, when they're following in this path and then it moves here and then it moves there, any thoughts on how leaders can maintain that credibility and their own personal resilience when they're having to move in a non-linear fashion?
Yeah, and I think you mentioned a couple of these points earlier, but it's being agile, I think, and it's being authentic. Because if you're authentic as a leader, you're putting yourself out there and saying, this is how I want to move. This is how we want to work as a team. It's how I'm going to operate. But you also have to accept when it goes wrong. And you can't be authentic if you're putting your hand up in the air saying, yes, we're going to be absolutely 100% fine. And people will not follow you at the minute. You've got to be open. You've got to look for honesty, but you've got to also set some aspiration about where you go in the future. So I think in terms of leadership, some things haven't changed. What hasn't changed in the last 6 months to a year is the fact we still live in a volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous world, a VUCA world. We're still in that zone. It's just changed. So actually the skills we need as HR and leaders are the same. You need to be really well connected to people, authentic, aspirational, but I think that's been under a lot more scrutiny in the last few months.
So a lot of the way leaders operate actually is influenced by the culture of the organization, and then they also influence the culture of the organization in these massively disrupted times. I'm wondering, Siobhan, our published author, thinking about culture, how do you go about creating the right culture to be able to deal with these disruptive times? And might that culture need to change going forward as we move into the next normal?
Yeah, so basically I'm coming at this as an insider. I spent a decade as an outsider and management consultant, and then I decided to roll up my sleeves and become an insider, and I've been the executive in charge of culture change in a series of multinational firms over the past 2 decades. And I've learned different things as an insider compared to the valuable insights I learned as an outsider, and I've captured these in a 4-step solution to creating workplaces that can deliver, grow, and adapt in disruptive times. And as you mentioned, that's in my book. And as I see it, HR has probably, I would condense it down to 2 critical roles in disruptive times. The first role that HR needs to step into is to help the business to deliver. And that's the sort of business as usual stuff that we do every single day. But the second critical role that HR needs to take up now is that role of a change enabler, enabling the organization to build an adaptive culture. So agility can sit at the individual level, but culture sits at the collective level. And it is patterns or the hidden agreements between the parts. That's what culture is. And often these hidden agreements, these patterns are invisible. They are difficult to detect and we can be caught by them. So the first step in my 4-step process is you've got to diagnose the patterns that are uniquely yours, that are actually going to stop you from being agile and from thriving and prospering into the future. Because those things that got you to this point, they may well have helped you, and the culture that you have, they may not be the culture that you need to move forward. And what I'm seeing over and over again is that managers everywhere at all levels in organizations are looking to HR for solutions. They want to be able to create adaptive cultures. And we can't keep going back to them with, here's an engagement survey, here's the new value statements, why don't we try a new process or procedure? Those tools don't work. We've got to come up with a new toolkit.
Thinking about that, diagnosing patterns, when we're all so busy kind of dealing with the day-to-day crises, how do you go about A, diagnosing what those patterns are, and then B, creating that space in the organization where people want to hear about this, because it can seem intangible, yet it's so important.
Yeah, great questions. The first, I'll take the second question first. The first thing you've got to remember is culture is not a nice to have. It's not a feel good. It's not just about employee engagement. For too long, we've framed culture in purely engagement terms. We've got to start with what is the strategic imperative or imperatives, what are the goals, and what is the culture that's going to enable those goals. The second thing is you've got to be able to step back. When I worked at ANZ, we did this major radical transformation of the bank in Australia that shifted it from the worst performing bank in the country to one of the highest performing banks in the world and one of the best regarded. And one of the things we saw when we walked in there was the pattern. A big pattern that was running the organization was that head office was in role of order giver, giving instructions to the branches, and they had taken up the role of order taker. And the big pattern or agreement between head office and the branches was a pattern of blame. You're to blame for the poor customer service. No, you're to blame. And round this toxic pattern went, and it drained energy from the whole organization. Now, if you didn't see the pattern, you would intervene in a different way. But because we saw the pattern, we reframed their roles from order giver to support provider to the branches. That was head office's new role. And from order taker to service provider to the customer. And that reframe with a new operating model shifted the pattern. It broke the pattern and introduced a different pattern into that organization. Incredibly powerful, but difficult to see sometimes when you're stuck in it. And I talk a lot about that in my book. How do we diagnose the pattern?
Do you think at the moment, how do you create that space where people are able to hear? Because this is actually quite ingrained stuff in the organization, whereas people are dealing with the now and the current P&L. What advice do you have for people who are trying to get execs or leaders on board to talk about culture and some of these perhaps what might be considered intangible things and really bring them to the center of the discussion?
Well, one of the things we've done at DuluxGroup just recently was start this reframe from, we've been in role of crisis leaders with our top 200 execs. So starting to reframe the role, saying, yes, there is a crisis leadership or a crisis management role here, but now we want you to also step into the role of ambiguity navigators. So just reframe gives your leaders a different mental map, and our actions or behaviors are guided by the mental map that we hold. So you can bring about change a lot faster if you change the mental map that your executives have. So Ambiguity Navigator is about seeing what's emerging on the horizon. It's like being on the bridge of the ship rather than being on the deck all the time. You've got to step onto the bridge of the ship, see the clouds, see the storms on the horizon, see the opportunities that are emerging, and create the type of culture that's going to get you to the next horizon, the next normal.
And that's a new skill and a new capability. How have you gone about building that capability within your leadership team?
I think one way of looking at it is capability, but the other way of looking at it is often people have an old framing of their role. So if they're framing their role still as crisis managers, they will take up their role in that way, and they will be reactive, they will be thinking in the now, they will be focused on the immediate and urgent priorities. But if you reframe their role also as leaders of ambiguity, you see that people can step into that role. It might not be a capability issue, it may be a framing issue. And we found that once you reframe the role, people naturally step into it, and they take it up often much better than you might appreciate that they will. And if they need skills, then we've had a whole lot of online tools for them. But framing is just as important sometimes as training, as capability.
Fascinating. Great. Thank you. Marco, thinking about that whole role of capability and how the L&D function is supporting the business during these difficult times. Do you think the role of L&D has changed in this time of crisis?
The short answer is probably not really, but I think it's worth reminding ourselves what the purpose of having a training and L&D function is in the first place. And I think a lot of organizations should have a good think about that. I find it Siobhan said it earlier, HR's job really is to help businesses to deliver. And as far as I'm concerned, the training and L&D departments are the people who help organizations execute that very task, right? To help people deliver, ensuring an organization's success through excellently trained and developed people. Now, you go on LinkedIn these days and you see so many L&D professionals that I know personally with an open to work badge on. I know of so many organizations who let go of their L&D teams, their training teams at these times. I've seen exactly the same pattern in the last recession, 2008-9. And it really begs a very important question. Every organization has a real spotlight on performance at this time. So I find it mind-boggling that the people who help an organization perform should be the people who are being made redundant. So I'm pretty sure, I'm not the biggest football fan, but I'm pretty sure that no Premier League team has ever won the Premier League without trainers, right? Mm-hmm. So if you want to win, surely you want to have the best trainers on your team. So if right now in times of crisis, particularly we're talking HR in retail here, we're talking HR in hospitality, where the customer has never mattered more, that I capture them and I create memories, I create an excellent service proposition. The training teams are those who help our people deliver that excellent service from a training point of view. And they also play a very, very big part in leadership. You know, we are leaders of leaders, all of us. So, you know, all of us around the table have spoken about how important leadership is at this moment in time. Now, we need every leader, and there are lots of leaders in organizations, top to bottom, to be on top form right now. And we've seen particularly in the very beginning of the pandemic, where some organizations have made some very questionable leadership decisions. And in some cases, that is probably because leading is hard. It's not easy, and people need to learn to lead, and people need to be developed to lead. And therefore, an L&D team, in my personal opinion, has probably never been more important than right now, if you want to win.
I think we may have lost Marco there for a moment. I'm sure he'll rejoin us. That whole thing about HR and L&D functions, you know, changing and supporting the business. I mean, partly it's about ensuring business continuity. Eugenio, I know you've done some exciting things at Dorchester. Do you want to talk us through about how you believe leadership can support the workforce and ensure business continuity at the moment?
Yeah, thank you very much, and hello everyone. Definitely, I think the most important thing that you can do to support your business is to protect your business, and side by that is about protecting your culture. And I think what we've seen during this pandemic is a lot of people started to forget what their vision was or what their purpose was. And I think more than anything, purposes has to be the key driver moving forward. And it should be in any crisis, but it doesn't change just because there is a crisis. And I think this is what we've seen out there. I mean, a lot of people decided to put COVID-19 in the center of their business because that's what was ultimately affecting it so negatively. And I understand that desire to want to do that. But the minute that you remove your customer, your guest, your employee from the center of your business, you've basically changed your business. And I think, you know, we saw it a lot in the hospitality industry because we saw companies out there starting to promote what they were doing from cleaning and health and safety standards. And we understand the importance of that. But ultimately, when people are returning to your business, they want to experience what you do and what you promise to deliver. Because of course, people are still paying to want to have your services. And I think that's the biggest thing that I could say when you're thinking about wanting to protect your business and support your business. You know, how you do that is really, whether it's through your values, and of course, this is the HR speak in me, you know, 30 years of doing it. But, you know, when you talk about the passion and the idea of working together, this is where that purpose comes to life. And this is where flexibility and agility comes to life. And ultimately, the creativity by taking different risks in your business that are going to still allow you to have business continuity. You know, we were in an enviable position because we made the decision, you know, within the first few days of, we sent something out to every single one of our 4,000 employees, and we said, we will protect you. So we made no redundancies at all during this period, and we kept everyone at their full salary, which was a big undertaking. And I think, you know, even we went into it not realizing that this was going to last as long as it has, but here we are. So we immediately started to take a look at our business. And, you know, we discussed on an earlier call, you know, the idea of, you know, control what you can control and influence what you can influence. And that's exactly what we did. And we really started to look at all of our contracts, how we ran our business, how we employed people outside of the company through contractors or whatever the case may be. And we made some tough decisions, but by doing that, we were able to actually save millions, which would allowed us to continue our traditional payroll. So, you know, tough decisions had to be made, but what we didn't compromise on was the experience that people came. And one of the biggest factors that we said and we saw when we began to reopen all of our properties, and now we're in a position where all of our hotels have reopened, is the most amazing compliments that we've been getting from our returning guests is, it's been wonderful to come back, and I've been scared to come back, but seeing the same faces and being reassured by that has really given me comfort and has really made me less scared. And that's really what it's about. So we really wanted to, again, protect the business and ensure that continuity. And the best way to do it is through your people, because they're the ones that know your business and know your guests.
I mean, that whole thing about luxury hotels, it's about relationships. There'll have been someone working in room service for 18 years, and Mr. Marco, who comes from New York, sees that person every year and knows their grandchild's name. And those relationships are massively important.
Absolutely. I mean, a third of our workforce reached more than 25 years of service this year, and protecting those people, and because they are the ones that have those relationships, is paramount. And you really need to understand that that's what your purpose is when it comes to people.
So Marco, thank you. We lost you there for a little minute there. I was just wondering if there's, you know, you rightly talked about the importance of the L&D function. I love the analogy of, you know, no football team is going to get rid of their trainers at the moment. But, you know, if you're sitting out there in the L&D function and you're feeling nervous or concerned or not sure about what your role should be, any you know, thoughts and advice from a chief people officer in terms of what you would say to them to build their own resilience and build their own sense of purpose?
Yeah, as I said, you know, I think L&D professionals, it's their job to make it easy for other people to be really good at their job. If I can answer that question, so like, is what I am doing right now making it easier for people to be really good at what they do, then I think you have a very good starting point. You know, as I said, I've always coached L&D professionals in that very way. I think every person regardless of what the job is that you're doing, you need to understand your why. You need to understand your raison d'etre, whether it's as an organization as a whole. Why are we here? What's our purpose? What are we doing? Eugenio has just put it beautifully about the purpose of making people feel really good and people paying a premium for that luxury experience because it makes them feel in a certain way. So if I can answer that question to myself as an if I'm whether I'm a junior brand trainer or I'm a talent director, regardless, what is my purpose, and do I aid the organization, the organization's success that way personally? I think if you can answer that question to yourself, then you've taken a big step forward. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, and there's that duality of role, actually. Siobhan, you talked about it as well. Me as an individual taking accountability for where I am and what I do, and then my professional role in terms of being in HR and L&D and having a step kind of in both camps, really. So we're obviously talking a lot and skirting around the issue of change. We're all going through massive amounts of change and change management. So I'm going to bring in our professor here, Martin, and ask you, we've most of us have had some training or schooling or read a few books on change in the last couple of years. Perhaps nothing could quite prepare us for what we're experiencing now. But Martin, do you think that kind of traditional ways of thinking about change management are useful to leaders right now, or do we need to think differently about change management?
I think they can be useful in part, but they're creaking under the pressure, basically. And if I go back to CIPD learning days, you've got the good old-fashioned Lewin's theories from the 1950s. You unfreeze your organization, you make a change, you refreeze. You've got Kotter's 8 steps. Like I said earlier, they're very linear, but actually they're all post-war and pre-COVID, aren't they? None of them were written in times where we're really under this chaotic, tumultuous change. So ultimately, yes, I think we're going to have to think about things differently. I'll give you an example of this actually, Mock. So over the summer, I was chatting to some friends. In fact, I think it was about May time when it was right in the peak of lockdown. And we were saying, the change curve, the Kubler-Ross thing, where you sort of acceptance, denial, you go down to depression. It's a really useful model. But there were so many things in our lives and work and socially, and everything was under pressure, that it was like we had a million different change curves going off at the same time. And it almost became irrelevant because you weren't at any stage on a model. You could be simultaneously feeling great in the morning and shocking in the afternoon. And so those change management models just are really difficult to interpret. And I was thinking about this in terms of change almost being on a spectrum. So, the rainbow, the symbol of the lockdown period. You look at a rainbow, it's a spectrum of light. But you can feasibly see just red and blue. You don't have to see every single colour in between. And I think it's the same for us as individuals and for businesses as well. So in retail, you may well be simultaneously facing a situation of ultimately the worst thing that could happen, closure of your stores, furlough of staff. But at the same time, you've got great opportunities for innovation, for growth at the same time. You're not on a model where, we'll grow again in 9 months. You've got to do it now. Yeah. So this is why traditional change management for me is not been working so well. And I've been encouraging people to think about things on a spectrum. So very simply, what's the worst things that are going on now through to what's the most positive, and think about things in that way rather than what model is going to help me.
Thanks for that. I think we're operating in a very unique position. A lot of our team members are hourly paid. A lot of our team members might be minimum wage. I'm interested as they are on the front line, interacting with our customers, dealing with all of the new COVID restrictions. Eugenio particularly, I'm interested in terms of how you manage their resilience, how you manage hourly paid, as I said, often minimum wage people through these massive amounts of change, which is on top of all the responsibilities and the tasks we're asking them to do anyway.
I think it's a bit twofold. I mean, it was quite an eye-opener, I think, for a lot of our leaders at the very beginning, because we immediately tried to do all the right things. We obviously we had to close 70% of our hotels. People had to go home. Although we took off the worry about them getting a paycheck so they could continue to live their lives. We immediately had phone trees put in place. We ensured that every single employee across the organization was personally spoke to at least once per week, because we wanted to make sure we kept in touch with them. And we got this view into their lives that we were not really aware of. You know, some people were living in mansions, people were living in 8 shared room suites. You know, it was really quite a remarkable thing. And so we had to deal with sort of that during the lockdown period, and really wanting to support them and making them feel that they were still part of it. And then, you know, the whole bringing them back out of lockdown, addressing the fear, you know, we put in place several re-engage programs. But when it came to actually them bringing them into the hotel, we decided to really concentrate on the emotional needs, both of our employees and our guests. Because ultimately, you know, it's the way we always structured our core standards and how we dealt with our guests anyway, and wanting to satisfy what need they were having when they came to the hotel and for what reason, because it continually changes and there can be several that you have to address. But it really served us well when we started to look at sort of the reason that people were doing what they were doing. You know, during the lockdown, we saw the need for people to have support with their children, or support with being alone, versus the fear factor when, you know, the future hit us. So it was really quite remarkable. So we employed a lot of different things, but I would say the common factor or the foundation became addressing people's emotional needs. And it really did serve us well, because, you know, we found that, you know, we had some great experiences where we did all this planning thinking when guests were going to come back. And then when we opened our first hotel, people came into the hotel and immediately stopped us and said, "This is what I want." And so all of the training, because guests knew exactly what they wanted to experience from the hotel, how they wanted to be served, whereas others, once we sat with them, and a 5-minute conversation turned into a 60-minute conversation, but then they were fine after that. But we found it gave reassurance to the employee as well. So it really became a very individualized approach.
I think we're in a very privileged position that people come and eat with us, they take their families to us, they come and sleep in our hotel bedrooms, we decorate their homes. Just to everyone on the group, really, I'm just interested in how the HR and the L&D community can continue to understand and anticipate what our customers' needs are as they will continue to change. I mean, Marco, you've got multiple brands under your responsibility there. How are your teams trying to figure out what each brand needs to do for the emerging changes of the customer?
Well, it's actually quite a challenge, but because, as you quite said, they're not just multiple brands; they're also across different countries. But that said, is the one I think Eugenio just mentioned it. The absolute key is to have a fantastic framework of transparent communication. So I need to be able to communicate with people at very short notice, and I need to be able, just for that reason, to have a flexible way of communicating with people if I need to, either with a lot of people or a small group of people. We didn't at the beginning of the pandemic, and I joined QOOT in the middle of the pandemic, so I was thrown right in there. Yeah, hurrah! We didn't have those systems and processes in place, so that was right at the top of the list. So we've now got a messaging system which helps us reach out to every single employee, but also create groups flexibly, like you would do on WhatsApp, etc. So if there is a specific need for a certain group of people, I can speak to them whether they're in work or not. And obviously, as a leadership team, it requires an amplified level of agility, which is needless to say. We are in touch with not just with our team members, but with our customers and guests regularly as well. I spend much more time in our sites than I do in the office, much more time or at home, to understand firsthand, and I speak to guests, I speak to customers, to learn their behaviors and what they're doing in order to help shape the organization that way. So I frequently, particularly in our quick service restaurants, I go where you're really reliant on office workers, students, etc., where one announcement from the government can have a massive effect for the following day onwards, or that night even. So I find myself daily now speaking to customers, which I didn't before really. And asking them about their habits, where they work, what they do, where they come from, how often they eat out, what their intentions are they feeling safe? So we can, depending on what concept it is, make the right decisions. Because it's a critical balance between making customers happy, saving jobs, and saving a business overall. So we need to have our finger on the pulse, much more so than ever before. So as I said, I find myself in the thick of it a lot more than normal. So my working patterns have changed through that as well. I'm sometimes a lot less productive in the day personally, because, as I said, I need to feel the temperature on the.
You probably need to be seen as well. Actually, people seeing you on the site, I think, is a real positive.
Yeah, as opposed to Eugenio, we actually had our sites open during lockdown for delivery only, because obviously the food delivery market has taken off significantly. We opened a number of delivery kitchens during that time, actually had new openings in that time as well. And for us, it was paramount to be seen with our employees. I can't just ask my employees to go and work during a pandemic in lockdown and produce delivery food so people can have the food delivery, and we as an organization still have income. Mm-hmm. However, we need to go in as well. So I remember the days when London was a ghost town, because I think it is important to be in touch personally with people, obviously at a safe distance, but to be in touch with people and be seen and understand their needs and how they feel.
Yeah, being out there and being seen, a vital part. But we will get through this. There will be a time post-COVID, and I'm interested, before we go to our delegates for any questions that they may have, what role do you think that HR plays and L&D plays in shaping the future vision of the organisation for a post-pandemic world? Now, Siobhan, you were nodding first, so may I go to you first? And we'll just go around everyone, 30 seconds each, and then we'll go to questions.
Yeah, I think one of the things that HR can do now is step back on the balcony and see what is going on in the organisation. An example in our company was people were stepping into a role of delivery manager, but in parts they were having safety incidents. So we had to reframe delivery manager with care. So you can be the eyes and ears, you can be reframing roles. That will give you the ability to be much more agile. You can help the leaders to see what role are we stepping into, what patterns are we slipping into, what are the reframes that are required, and that way you can pivot. You can be much more agile as you head into the future. Critical role.
Fantastic. Martin, thinking, I'm sure there'll be a white paper on this at some point in the future from the university, but thoughts on how we can help shape the future?
I think one of the critical roles in 30 seconds is probably just to be that employee champion and really make sure you're on the side of those people who are going through tough times, often on the front line, as you said earlier, and being the ear and also, dare I say it, being a little bit of a buffer sometime between the operators who are in real tough situations as well and trying to drive results. And I think that's where HR can really come in and shape that vision of doing it in partnership and doing it collaboratively.
Great. Eugenio, your thoughts about how, in a global, again, multi-brand business, how the role that your team will play in shaping the future?
Well, I mean, from my perspective, for years, I've said that HR is an operational department. And I think it really speaks to what Martin and Siobhan have said, in that, we are not just on the sidelines, trying to conduct or trying to, as rightly said at the very beginning, do employee engagement surveys and things like that. We are operational. We have to be in the business. We have to work side by side with people. We have to understand the roles that are being delivered. And in order to achieve the ultimate vision of the company, that means you're on that same path as everyone else. And I think HR needs to get out from behind the desk and be involved. And I would say bat on any HR department that's not already.
And Marco, I'll ask you to sort of close on this before we go to our delegates, if they have any questions for us. Your thoughts?
Yes, I think, Martin just mentioned it as well. You have operations and HR joined at the hip. HR have played their part as emergency service as emergency services in the last few months, and now it's time to look into the future, because it's not just about saving jobs in the here and now and caring for people who are looking after them, because it is about saving jobs in the long term. So HR, together with ops, need to be the innovators of how we can continue to have a reason for being as a business, and how we can achieve that and future-proof an organization whilst protecting the people within. Recruiting, developing, training people, all the key HR functions have never been more important. If you're talking about, you need the best people on your team right now if you want to win. So HR is right in the middle of that.
Great, thank you. And that whole piece around leading in history and facing the organization forward, a vital role for us as individuals, and helping our leaders to do that as well. Brilliant, thank you very much.
Can I just add to that, just summarizing that, because one of the things I've been saying is HR needs to be a business leader with an HR specialty. So I think that future reframe for the function is that you are a commercial business leader who happens to have an HR specialty. I think the more we step into that role, the more we're going to earn our place at the table.
When I got my first HRD role, I remember I was appointed by the CEO, and he said to me, you need to be as concerned about football in Poland, signage in Spain, as you do about talent development in the UK. You just happen to represent people on the board, but all of those things are equally as important to you now. And it was a real it was a long time ago, but it was a real light bulb moment for me. Great, super. Thank you very much for your conversation, for your point of view, hearing some wonderful examples of what's happening in your businesses. And I'm going to hand over to Paul. Do we have any questions from our delegates, or have we stunned them into silence over the 1 minute?
Well, far from it. I think you have probably answered an awful lot of questions. It's been a fantastic discussion. So thank you very much, one and all. None have come through on the chat. We will just give people a moment or two just to type if they want to do so. But just while they're doing that, if they wish to do so, let me just reflect on the conversation. A couple of things that stood out for me, because although there was a whole range of different things, just a couple of things stood out from each speaker. And you know, I love the fact that we talked about the sort of the leading change in chaos not being linear. You know, that's so important at the moment. And I see it in my career coaching about, you know, careers being squiggly careers now, not linear careers. It's so important for us to think about that, as so many people are moving through their careers in different ways. And talking about agility, of course, and Siobhan, your point about sort of agility being at an individual level, but culture at a collective level. That really resonated with me in particular. Marco, your point, the football analogy has been used a couple of times in the conversation, but again, I remember it back in the 2008 crisis as well. Why does it happen every time? Why can't we learn? It's so important. Don't get rid of the good guys. You know, teach your teams how to be better leaders, how to run their businesses better. We have to learn. Please play forward. And keeping purpose at the center of your business. Eugenio, you know, that was such an important point, and with purpose being such a critical discussion factor in this day and age, again, I think the point was really well made. In times of change, let's not lose sight of why we're here and what we're doing. So all points that really resonated with me. People will pick up different points from the conversation, which was rich in its content. So thank you, one and all. I've just seen a question coming in. Siobhan, I'm interested in patterns in organizations. How do you pick up patterns in these very volatile, changing times? Framing happens when you have prior knowledge, I assume.
Yeah, so that's an excellent question, and it's something that we have to rewire our brains to do, because we haven't been taught to see patterns. We've been taught to think in terms of root cause analysis. So we go back and back and back, and there is the root cause, whereas patterns are the agreements between the parts, and often we don't see those. So the example I gave at ANZ, people couldn't see the pattern, but there was a blame pattern between the head office and the branches, and that was running the whole organization. So we intervened to break that pattern, not to, you know, we could have gone in and put everybody in the branches into a skills training course. What would that have done? It probably would have exacerbated the blame pattern. It wouldn't have resolved it. So we've got to rewire our brains to see these patterns. I talk about that, how you see patterns, how you can diagnose patterns in my book, The Insider's Guide to Culture Change. It's a skill that I think we've got to start to develop more, rather than just simply diagnosing what happens in the parts. We have to see, as Bateson said, it is the pattern that connects. You can't do it by a survey though. An engagement survey won't reveal these patterns. So you've got to step back on the balcony, step back onto the bridge, as I talk about, and be able to see what are the connections between the parts. How are the different parts fueling these patterns that are no longer serving you as a business? For example, you know, there could be, there's so many agreements that you can have in an organization. Like there could be an agreement that we step in to micromanage our people, and that's just the way things are done. Everybody is micromanaging. Is that going to be agile enough for you to thrive in the future? Probably not. You need to see that pattern and you need to break that pattern. But the difficulty is that leaders are often co-creating these patterns inadvertently with all the best intentions. They have served you well, but they may not serve you in the future. So I give lots of examples in my book if you want to learn how to see these patterns.
Can I just add on as well, Mark? I think there's a really interesting point here about engaging with people who are divergent and atypical thinkers. I don't know if you spotted that, Siobhan, but I certainly think in university, those people who are sometimes atypical, they don't think in the same way as the majority, they spot patterns quicker. And it can be really important to engage with them. Great.
And the other thing is people who are new to the organization can see the pattern much more clearly than you can, or outsiders, you know, from outside the organization to come in and help you to see what you've become blind to. So it's a bit like, I often say, it's a bit like dysfunctional families. When you're in a dysfunctional family, you can't see that it's dysfunctional, but everybody outside the family looks in and goes, wow, that's really dysfunctional, but you can't see it when you're caught in it. So you need, there's a number of different ways, and Martin, that's a really excellent one, but there's a number of different ways that you can spot these patterns.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed. So, you know, let me encourage our delegates to follow up on the two published authors who are on the panel here, Siobhan and Mock. Please follow up on them. I trust none of the others are published authors. Sorry if I've omitted that. However, let me finish that by thanking everybody on the panel. Thank you so much. It's been a really, really interesting discussion. My final word is, you know, a lot of that is summarized, I think, by almost Mock's intro and his thoughts on leading through his 5 H's, through head, heart, habit, health, and history. It's a really nice summary of the topic. So thank you to the delegates. We'll stop the broadcast in a moment, but please come back for our next discussion on the legal aspects of the current conditions, and that's at 11:30, so just in half an hour's time. So we look forward to seeing everybody back then. But for the moment, thank you once again, panelists, and we'll look forward to catching up on the recording for everybody when that gets published as well. So thank you, and
bye everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Thanks,
guys.
Paul. Thanks, Mark.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.